started my new job as a janitor in winter. That's important because winter meant darkness came early, and once the sun went down, the buildings felt older somehow, heavier, like it remembered things better in the dark. The school was over 100 years old, a 3-story brick structure with narrow hallways and high ceilings that swallowed sound. At the center of the building was a wide staircase that ran straight up through all 3 floors, open from bottom to top. You could stand on the ground floor and look all the way up to the 3rd, past iron railings and shadowed landings. On each landing stood a statue. They were life-size brass figures of presidents. Theodore Roosevelt on the 1st floor, Abraham Lincoln on the 2nd, and George Washington on the 3rd. They weren't tucked into alcoves or behind glass. They just stood there, facing the staircase, watching anyone who used it. Their surfaces were worn smooth from decades of polishing, faces dulled by time, eyes darkened just enough that they never reflected light the way they should have. My shift started at 2 p.m. and ended at 10:30 at night. Teachers and staff were usually gone by 5, sometimes earlier if the weather was bad. In winter, the sun disappeared around the same time they did. By the time it was dark outside, I was alone. That was when I would notice the statues. Not directly, never directly. It was always peripheral. Just a sense of someone on the landing as I climbed. A flicker of motion that vanished the moment I turned my head. I'd look up and see Roosevelt frozen mid-stride, one hand on his hip, the other clenched like he was about to make a speech. Nothing had changed. Still, my heart would already be racing. The building had its usual noises. Pipes ticking, radiators sighing, distant thuds from the storm outside. That night, rain battered the windows so hard it sounded like fingers tapping glass. Wind howled through gaps in the old masonry, and every gust made the building groan. I went room to room, like always. Trash, desks, floors, lights. Around 6, I closed a classroom on the 2nd floor, turned off the lights, shut the door. I remember checking the handle, giving it a quick pull to make sure it latched. When I passed that room 20 minutes later, the door was open. The lights were on. At first, I assumed I'd made a mistake. That happens when you work alone long enough. Your memory starts to blur together. Still, something about it bothered me. The door wasn't just cracked. It was wide open, like someone had stood there for a moment, deciding whether to leave. I shut it again, turned the lights off. This time I stood there longer, listening. Nothing. As I walked back toward the staircase, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Lincoln. Just for a split second, I thought his head was turned, angled slightly toward me instead of facing forward. When I looked directly at him, he was exactly the same as always. By 7, the storm was at its worst. Rain hammered the roof so loudly it drowned out the building's usual creaks. Thunder rolled low and long, rattling the windows. That's when I noticed the back door. It was propped open. The school backed up to a small parking lot in a line of bare winter trees. The door was heavy, industrial, and equipped with a hydraulic closer that never let it stay open on its own. Yet there it was, gaping, just enough to let the rain blow in and pool on the tile floor. Cold air rushed past me as I pulled it shut. I checked the latch twice. When I turned around, I realized the hallway lights behind me were on. I hadn't turned them on. I stood there for a long time, listening to the storm, the hum of the lights, telling myself there was a simple explanation. Old wiring, motion sensors, someone forgot something. That thought became real about 10 minutes later. A voice, echoed down the hall. "Hello?" I nearly dropped my keys. It was another janitor. One of the day staff. He looked soaked, jacket dripping onto the floor. He said he'd left his phone in the teacher's lounge and didn't want to come back the next day for it. We walked for a minute, normal conversation, normal voice. The relief I felt was embarrassing. Before he left, he asked me a question that stuck with me. "Do you ever feel like this place doesn't like being empty?" He just stood there for a second longer than necessary, rain dripping off his jacket, eyes scanning the hallway behind me like he was listening for something else. Then he thanked me and left. The building felt different after the door closed behind him. Not quieter, emptier, like whatever noise had been filling the space before had suddenly realized it was alone again. I went back to work. Around 7:30 I heard it. A basketball, bouncing. Slow, deliberate, one bounce at a time. The sound echoed faintly through the halls, distorted by distance and architecture, but unmistakable, hardwood, hollow, followed by the faintest echo, like it was coming from the gym. Then came laughter, children's laughter. Not loud, not close, just enough to register, before my brain tried to explain it away. I stopped walking, the sound stopped too. I stood there for a long time, keys clenched in my hand, listening to the storm batter the building. Pipes ticked, the lights hummed, nothing else moved. I told myself the same thing everyone does in old buildings, that sound travels strangely, that water and pipes can mimic anything if you're tired enough. Still, I went to check. The gym was dark, locked, empty. The bleachers were folded in, the floor untouched, no balls, no people, no movement of any kind. I stood there with my hand on the door, listening. Nothing. The sound didn't come back, but it stayed with me. Every time I turned off a light after that, I half expected to hear it again. One bounce, then another. Every time I rounded a corner, I listened for voices that weren't there. It was after 9 when I heard something else. Not laughter. A voice. Low. Indistinct. Somewhere below me. It wasn't clear enough to make out words, but it had cadence, rising and falling in a way that suggested speech. The moment I stopped walking, it stopped too. The basement door was open. I was sure I'd shut it earlier. I remember doing it. The door was heavy and had to be propped to stay open. I went down anyway. The basement smelled like damp paper and old wood. The lights buzzed weakly overhead, barely cutting through the shadows. Shelves lined the wall, stacked with broken desks, old boxes, forgotten furniture. At the far end of the room, leaning against a metal shelf, was a framed photograph. It was small, dusty, easy to miss. Showed a classroom from decades ago. Wooden desk, tall windows, a chalkboard filled with looping cursive. Students sat stiffly, hands folded. Standing at the center was the teacher. I recognized her immediately. Her name was engraved on a dedication plaque near the main staircase. I'd pass it every night without thinking about it. In the photo, she wasn't smiling. She wasn't frowning. Her eyes were angled slightly away from the camera like someone had just spoken to her just before the shutter clicked. Nothing about her expression stood out. That bothered me more than it should have. I turned to leave. The basement door slammed shut. The sound cracked through the room, sharp and final. The lights flickered once and steadied. I jumped back, heart hammering. I stared at the door, forcing myself to breathe. I must not have wedged it properly. Storm pressure, old hinges, my mistake. That had to be it. I didn't go back upstairs right away. Instead, I went to the administrative office on the first floor, the one with the old filing cabinets no one touched anymore, paper staff records from before everything went digital. It took longer than I expected to find her. Her folder was thin, Inside were employment records, a commendation letter, and a final incident report. The language was careful, vague. She had died on school grounds, late at night. No witnesses, no charges, no clear explanation. The dedication plaque made sense now. It wasn't celebrating her career. It was marking where it ended. That's when the PA system came on. Static bursts through the building, loud, sudden, overwhelming, followed by silence, then footsteps running directly above me. I didn't wait to hear more. I dropped the file on the desk and went straight through the front office. My hand shook as I punched in the alarm code. When the doors finally opened, the storm hit me full force, rain soaking through my clothes in a second. I ran into the night without looking back. I never finished that shift. I never worked another night there again.